If you want to support our podcast financially, please visit patreon.com/IIMBSB. Also, email us with questions or ideas at ifimaypodcast@gmail.com. So today we speak with my good friend Maya Vizvary, who works for the Office on Violence Against Women at the DOJ in DC. She tells us about her experience with becoming a mother and how it has changed her and her relationships. And she tells us a wild story.
Welcome to If I May Be So Bold,
a podcast about relationships. I'm Dan Epstein, recording artist, Enneagram 4, and ADHD DJ.
I'm Justin Waring Crane, model, actress, singer, dancer, mathematician.
We've never really done this, gone in just like raw dogging. No prep call.
Oh, yeah.
It's scary.
I know. I'm a little nervous.
Yeah. What's your biggest fear?
I won't know what to say.
You'll just be like, yeah.
You will.
What are your emotions like today otherwise?
I have a little, we have a farewell party for the share. So there's like some sadness and some, embracing the next phase. Yeah. But also like kind of ready for the share to be over. Like it feels good.
Your nanny share.
The nanny share, yeah.
Do you think Kira's going to miss it?
For sure. She's like excited about school, but then other times is not because she knows she's not going to be with Helen or Shay anymore.
And when we visited, it was just about to start. When we visited
I
you.
know.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's like it's almost exactly 2 years. Like I think we started like mid-September 2021.
Wow. So, Maya, you're one of my best friends from college. Mm-hmm. So nice to have you on.
We've known each other
here.
20 years.
Ah! Wow.
Almost like exactly.
What the fuck?
I want each of you to share a fun or crazy memory of the other person from college.
Oh man.
The first one that popped into my mind was this one time you got rollerblades at some point.
Uh-huh.
And like
I had them. I brought them up from home.
You brought them up. I don't remember what the context was, but you were just wearing them. I don't know if we were at a party or something socially, and you kept doing this bit where you kept being like you would get too worked up or something. You're like, I gotta blade this out, you guys. And you would just go like blade.
I love that.
I don't remember that at all. That's fun. Dan and I, my husband Dan and I just went to a drive-in movie theater when we were in Maine. And I was like, I think one of the last times I was in a drive-in movie theater was you and I went. Did we go with anyone else?
With Mike
Maselli.
Yeah, and we saw Blades of Glory.
Whoa, another rollerblading or blade theme.
Yeah. Similar.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the first
I don't remember
movie.
what movie it was and like where it was in Georgia. Like it must have been not that far away, right?
I feel like it was like a half hour outside of the city or something.
Which felt like a long distance.
I remember that was like a really dreamy day where Mike had his Sebring convertible and we got breakfast and like rode around with the top down, and it just felt like really nice and like peaceful.
So much free time.
I know. Yeah. So you said you wanted to talk about, and it's okay if this has changed, motherhood, how becoming a mom has informed, changed your relationships. Mm-hmm. Is that still feeling good, resonant?
Yeah. I mean, this podcast is about relationships, and I feel like motherhood, parenthood, but particularly motherhood, it feels like it changes kind of every relationship in your life. Like the one with yourself, the one with your partner, your partnered, the one with your parents, the one with, and like not people too, but things like time and flexibility and your body,
Mm.
food,
Wow.
work, and then another person, relationship, friendships. Yeah.
Does that spark something for you, Justin? Any of those in particular?
Well, of all those relationships, what do you feel like? I don't know. Like, has the way motherhood changed any of those relationships? Like, of all the things you just named, like it changes your relationship to your body, to your partner, to your friends. Like,
I mean, I feel like they're all pretty transformative, and a lot of it is just your priorities shift kind of in every one of those categories, and your identity shifts, right? So, have you guys heard the term? I think I'm saying this correctly. Matrescence.
One more time?
Matrescence.
I have, but I don't know what it
No,
means.
I don't know.
It's like adolescence, but it's when somebody becomes a mother. And they're doing a lot more like research and looking at this because, of course, there hasn't been a ton of research or look at women in general, but, mothers and pregnancy and postpartum. And, they have found that like even the changes in your hormones are like more significant than that, which happens at puberty. It's like the most significant change in hormones at any part of your life. And something that has just kind of been compelling is just knowing how the world functions and just seeing it through the eyes as a mother. There was this TikTok, I don't remember who it said, but she was kind of like, nothing will radicalize you more than having a child in the US. And it's just true. You just like come across the systems and see how they're really like working against women and children. That didn't really answer your question about like which relationship, but yeah, there's, just a new identity and your priorities change. And so like with the work, for example, like I like care a lot less about shit at work. Like I don't get as bothered by things. Drama that happens at work feels petty to me in a way. I have like a second job and it's like a more important job that will take precedence. So like if I need to leave, if I'm like physically at an office, that like it's just, it's going to be my child that takes precedent.
I like that you're not caring as much about just stuff at work feels less important because of that. And there's been times in my life, and I know this is an insane thing to say, and I think maybe it just speaks to like how trapped I was feeling, but there's been times where I'm like so run down by work and just feeling like this, nothing could be harder than this job, where I'm like, I just want to have a kid so I can like have, something that's just feels so clearly like I'm making a difference positively in someone's life. And, I understand that the insanity of that, feeling like surely having a kid would be easier than this. But that's just like how insane my job was. I mean, it is, but it's like, it's feeling like, oh, okay, I'm doing this stuff for all these families, but it's like if I had just one kid, I would be doing it for just one kid, and it would be my kid, So, yeah, I don't really feel that way right now, but
I feel like something that's not really talked about is like the calculus of reproductive health and in your 30s that comes in with your career. I mean, we know about the like, penalty for women and how they're just always kind of behind. And one of the major reasons is because of motherhood, right? And if that's either from like they took some years off to work in the home, or they like didn't get a promotion because like it was thought of that they might get pregnant or they're going to have a kid soon. But honestly, I'm also at the point now where like I'm starting a new job and the new job has less responsibility and it's more, if you were looking at like the corporate ladder, even though I don't work in the corporate world, but like it's more of a step down than a step up. And it's just because I don't have, well, the sun on my face right now. I don't have the like energy to manage work when I'm also like managing, life at home too. Yeah, but I think that I've totally had those calculuses too. Like last year, well, there's this one event that my old job, for some reason, my position, I had to be very involved with putting on this big event. And it was like a really horrible experience. And I had the thought of like, okay, well, maybe next year I'll be pregnant or like just have a baby so I won't have to do this.
Totally. And that's actually already after you'd had a kid, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like,
and I mean, like, even now, like my job, there's a calculus with my work and my, reproduction. Like we want to have another kid, but I didn't want to have it while I was on my old job because I just was not of good mind and body health there. And I was like, well, I don't want to start a new job and be pregnant because it's kind of horrible to be in the first trimester at work. And it's also really hard postpartum at work because I would say it took at least 6 months for my brain to like come back into the professional world. Like your brain changes so much after you have a kid. And it's done for protective reasons, right? There's certain things that like our logical executive functioning is kind of dampened and our like emotions, senses are heightened because back in the day we were, on guard, making sure that nobody was going to eat our child or our child wasn't in danger, that sort of thing.
That's something I really am curious about, like what that shift was like for you. I think that goes under relationship to self because you think like what your brain is and like what your personality is. And when your physical actual brain is changing, that's got to feel really wacky. And I don't know, for me, it makes me feel scared because it's just like, I don't know. The brain is so weird and we don't understand like even a fraction of it. But what was that like for you being like, okay, like now I have this whole new brain?
Well, I don't think it's like, it wasn't necessarily like negative changes, nor did it feel like forever changes. I'm actually reading a book right now. I have it right here. I think you would like it. Just
hold it up.
It's called Mother Brain.
Ooh.
How Neuroscience is Rewriting the Story of Parenthood by Chelsea Conaboy. I've just started it though, so I'm not really well versed in it.
That's so cool. I'm gonna check that out.
But I also think I have somewhat of it's not unique because a lot of new mothers have had either traumatic births or like postpartum mental illness issues. So
do you want to, could we just say like real quick,
my traumatized brain was probably more overtaking my non-traumatized brain.
Yeah. Do you want to should we make reference to the fact that your birth was like an insane episode?
Yeah. I've done a lot of therapy, and including EMDR. So I'm like able to talk about it. But I had my daughter, Kira, in the beginning of June 2020. And at that time, only, okay. So at that time, there was only PCR tests. And in March 2020, like towards the end of March, I was like, oh, I definitely have COVID. And I wrote my doctor and I asked for a test. And they were like, they're out in March 2020, only healthcare workers could get tests. And so they were like, well, unless you need to be hospitalized, like stay home. So then came my birth, and I would say that I had a multi-trauma birth because I had a very, what's called a precipitous labor. It happened very quickly. When I got to the hospital, I was 5 centimeters, and I fully went through active labor and transitioned and started pushing when I was in the triage room, which is like the tiny little room they take you in while they see if you're in labor. And then if you're indeed in labor, then and if there's a labor and delivery room available, they'll cart you over to one. So normally folks, especially their first birth, labor for days. So it was a surprise to us all that it happened within like an hour for me. The funny thing about this was just shows you June 2020 and how little we knew about COVID or what we were doing. Because I think that like we forget this as a culture, but like, so there was probably like 4 or 5 people in the room at the time. There's like nurses and my midwife, and then this guy trying to put my port in, or my hep lock. And then they were like, okay, we're going to do your COVID test. And everyone went out. Oh, and Dan was also there, my husband. And so everyone went out, and the midwife came back in, and she was wearing like full, like PPE, like looks like she was in like a hazmat suit, and did my test and then left. And then everyone came back in like barely masked. So it was just like really funny. Like the test was the big like exposure in their minds, I guess. Not me like,
huffing and puffing,
groaning in labor.
Yeah.
So by the time I got to the labor and delivery room, and Kira's heart rate was dropping, and she was too far up for them to feel comfortable with me pushing. I do like have a lot of faith in these midwives that they wouldn't like, like have an unnecessary intervention. But I also think at that time, like C-sections were a lot more, they were just doing more C-sections, I think, to have more control over the environment. And also remember like hospitals were like nervous about, and doctors were nervous about like losing money and stuff like that. So,
wait, do you think specifically during COVID, they were doing more C-sections?
I think so.
Yeah. Wow.
I'm sure the research will show in like 5 or 10 years. And just hospitals were so, as they still are, they're so nervous about their liability, right?
Yeah.
So they do everything out of risk reduction. So anyways, I had to get an emergency C-section. So I was in the labor and delivery room for like 8 minutes total. And then they like ran me to the OR, and Dan couldn't be in there because like I had to go under general anesthesia because I didn't have a hep block in, or I didn't realize this was going to be my whole birth story, but because at one point my like hep block like flew out, because when the guy was trying to put it in, I was like sweating a lot. And that's because I was in transition, but none of us knew that or thought that that was happening. And transition is the like time between active labor and like pushing. And it's usually like the time where like shit really hits the fan. And like usually women are pregnant people are like I can't do this, like just take me home, like I'm not gonna, you know what I mean, like I can't do it, and usually they're sweating, sometimes vomiting, all that stuff. So anyways, my hep block flew out, and so they had to like get me to the OR and put me under general anesthesia. So I was asleep during Kira's birth. And Dan was in the labor and delivery room. And then they brought Kira to Dan. And then like 2 minutes in, they were like, oh, we need to take her away. Because while I was in the OR, my test results came back positive.
For COVID.
For COVID. And, now we know that PCR tests can show up like positive for 90 days after.
Oh, right.
We did not know that at the time.
Right.
They also, the test didn't show like viral load. I was like asking for that. So anyways, they sent Dan home, which still doesn't really make any sense to me. And then they put Kira in a separate room. She was in a like COVID nursery. And then I was by myself in a recovery room and fully had to like recover from a C-section by myself. And it was like also because I showed positive for COVID, like people didn't want to come in and take care of me, which I was like, okay, that's understandable. Like, I feel like the nurses at the time were like, I don't want to risk my life for someone,
Sure.
So I wasn't probably attended to as much as I normally would have been. Our doula wasn't allowed to be in the hospital either. So I didn't meet Kira for 3 days when we were both discharged.
So wild.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. It's an insane episode.
Welcome to my birth story. So I know you guys like to talk about attachment too. So that was also like a big worry of mine. And I probably like swung the other way to make like overcorrect.
What do you mean you overcorrected?
Just making sure that we were as close as possible,
Yeah.
And then I think like we were home together all the time for a year. Yeah. So that was like, a blessing, definitely a silver lining of the pandemic.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say Justin and I are going to have a kid. I'm like, I come to you and I'm like, just want to know like any wisdom, any advice about like what to expect or like how to navigate like our relationship in that first year after having a kid. Like, what would you say?
Great cue, D.
This isn't an announcement, is it?
No. That'd be really cool of us, though. And you're the first person we would tell.
So I would say something I wasn't prepared for or didn't expect was all the like emotional labor and the mental load of parenting. And how that just, a lot of things are invisible, right? There's like the invisible load of motherhood and things kind of, especially in a heterosexual relationship, like things naturally fall onto the mom to be the default parent. And I mean, the other thing is like when you breastfeed too, like you're the feeder, you're the provider. Like I breastfed for a year. So, and I also feel like that kind of set me up to also be the one to think about like feeding like solid foods and, meals and things like that. But like just so much about like your everyday life and like life administration and household work and the division of labor was unexpected and harder. There's this book called Fair Play by Eve Rodsky. You know it?
Yeah, we have it. We have not read it.
Yeah. I think some of it is hard to do. Like, I don't know if the cards would actually be realistic. I think it's hard to really, at least in our world, in our relationship, like thinking about like one person taking complete ownership over all these tasks. Like, I feel like there's too much like things that change from week to week or day to day. I actually saw this clip from Brene Brown, which was really cool. I feel like helpful to hear. She was like, you'll never, relationship is never going to be 50-50. Like, that's impossible. She's like, something Steve and I do is, we'll come in and kind of say where we're at. Like, maybe I'm a 20. So if I'm a 20, then he knows, he might need to step up more and be more of an 80. Or we're both at 30, and just because of, outside circumstances, we're both at the 30s. So we're just going to order takeout and not put pressure on ourselves to do anything, spectacular. I would say something that like also, especially once the baby starts eating solid foods, like something that changed drastically was just like dinner time. So I feel like before we had Kira, like I barely knew like, if Dan and I were going to have dinner that night, we would make dinner sometimes together during the week, but it wasn't like, okay, like we have to be home for dinner time. And like, we have our like meals planned out for the week and that sort of thing. I feel like before it was kind of like, oh yeah, maybe I'll see Dan tonight, or he might go out, like meet up with his friends for happy hour and then like come back late. Maybe we'll eat at like 9. It really like shifts with a kid. And and we do it, we have our dinner at like 7:30, which is like a lot of our friends and neighbors, their like kids are in bed at 7:30. So we're like later than most of our friends. So a lot of them are eating dinner at like 5:30 or 6, which is pretty wild to me and hard to imagine like getting that together, like getting our shit together by that time of the day.
Yeah.
Totally. Love talking about Brene and Steve.
I know.
This podcast should just be about Steve. But yeah, I like that what they had talked about was like, if there's ever a time where their combined capacity is less than 100%, they like have to sit down and make a plan of like how things are going to go so it doesn't fall apart or they don't like damage their relationship or like their interactions with their kids. I just think that's a great practice. So I ride for that.
And I would say the other thing that is surprising has been like the lack of space to have intentional conversations or ways to like work on things, right? Like there's so much mental load that comes with being a parent and managing a household, and especially if you're a working parent, that it just feels like there's the space like isn't there. Like at the end of the night, after the child or children go to bed, it's like you're so like overstimulated and zapped that like having a conversation about things, and like you both have to be on the same page too, of like being open to having a conversation and like discussing issues. So that was also like kind of a surprising thing. And like, if you have ways to make it more intentional, like to have space for that check-ins, I would say that would be a good way.
Yeah.
And I would say if you're somebody that gets overstimulated, like parenthood is very overstimulating.
Yeah.
Justin?
Yeah. I know that's something that I worry about because I already feel so exhausted at the end of the day and just feel like my brain is so like completely saturated. Even if I didn't do that much or even if I didn't go to work, it's just like I've had all these thoughts and like listened to a million books and a million podcasts. And I get that that's like, I do that to myself, but I'm just like, I can't even imagine with a kid.
Well, those things take different priority.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I read a lot less than I used to. Or if I read at all now, it's about like motherhood or Bravo. And yeah, like I will say that you do kind of get this new level of resilience and I guess maybe energy. I don't know. Like I feel like you like can't take a sick day really as a parent. So
That is so chilling to me when I think about that.
I know.
I think about that a lot, and I'm just like, if you feel like shit, like you still have to get up and be a parent. Like that's hell.
Mm-hmm. It's
So
overwhelming
disturbing.
to think of, for sure.
Yeah.
I remember like being like 36 weeks pregnant and having a lot of anxiety about that. I was like, it's every day for the rest of your life. Like,
Yeah.
you know, but there, and it definitely feels the most intense, I think, the first year. But then you do find you like slowly come back to yourself or your old self. I mean, you'll never be like the same person, right? But you slowly get back to your old self, I would say, in a way, and you find ways to take breaks. And like yesterday, I just this week is like I have a week of childcare, but no work, so which is like a golden week. So on Tuesday night, I like spent the night somewhere like 50 minutes north, and then yesterday went to this spa for 4.5 hours. It was like the longest I've ever been in a spa treatment. I honestly, it was a little too long. I was like, I might do like 3 hours next time. But yeah, like you have to do that. Like it's, I can see how it's very easy to totally lose yourself in motherhood and not do anything for yourself by yourself. But
yeah,
I'm like pretty intentional about getting that time on the calendar and, you know, doing that stuff. And I also think it's important for my child to see, you know.
Yes. I love that. And I want to say, as someone who sees a lot of parents and a lot of kids, you know, with my job for the past 7 years, it's like when I was around you and around Kira, I was like, Maya is such an amazing mom. And it was just like really cool to see. And I was like, not comparing, obviously, but like it just does stand out like when you see a parent who's like, it just seemed balanced. Like you were not like fretting over like every single thing, you know, with her. And it just seemed like you seemed so relaxed. And I was like, yeah, like that's a big reason like why Kira's so happy is because like she sees you happy, she sees you relaxed. So that was really cool. It stays with me.
That's nice. Yeah. I will say I feel like I, particularly like with a newborn, was a pretty confident mom. And I don't know if everyone feels that way. And so I can see how like I could see how you could easily like look up things at 3 a.m. you know, or be influenced by what you see on social media, right? But I've tried to always lead with like my intuition with parenting, and you know, and I always think that like you got to do what you know works for you and your family and your child. It's going to be different for everyone. So that's why I'm also like very that's like my advice is like to not take advice.
I think that's wise. Like, you know, there's so much advice out there and you can definitely like peruse it, I think, but then like, you know, it takes some discernment to just say like, okay, like I'm going to try that and I'm not going to try that. And just, only take in what feels like in line with your intuition already. I think that's cool.
I feel like one thing that I've thought about with parenting in the recent past is like, it just seems like such an important part of the equation is listening and observing your child and like taking them in, as opposed to like asserting what you want them to be or how you want them, what type of, are you willing to share, like, has there been moments where like certain behaviors or things where you felt your stuff coming up and you're being like, no, don't be that type of child, be this type of child?
Well, it's interesting because I feel like there's times when I feel like Dan's doing that. But there's probably times where he thinks I'm doing that too. Because also like once you become parents together, you're naturally going to have different parenting styles, right? Like there's definitely big things that you need to be on the same page about. But I also think it's helpful for your child to have different styles of parents and caregiving figures in their lives. Like I would not do it that way, but like it's good that she's experiencing that. So I feel like for me with Kira, it's like anytime she like some perfectionism kind of shows up in her, or like if she makes a mistake, she feels like really bad. Yeah. So I just like try to let her like feel, also like just feeling the feelings, like making sure I'm holding space for her to feel the feelings and like work through it and not expect any sort of like timeline with her feelings or path of her feelings either.
Yeah, totally. That's great. Yeah, I've definitely come across parents where I get frustrated from afar. Granted, it's easy when it's not me who's in that position every day, but where like I've seen, especially with like dads, where they're like, their child's really emotional and they're like, it doesn't make any sense that they're so emotional. Like this isn't, like, it's just like,
Yeah. I know that drives me crazy.
Yes, I'm sure. Yeah, it's like, it's hard to see. I mean, I will say, Dan's great about emotions and that sort of thing too. But, and I like have to remind myself, and I'm sure he has to be reminding himself that like, a toddler brain is a toddler brain, right? Like they're not, they're testing out so many limits and they're not super logical at the time. But I will say like, I feel lucky to have a child that doesn't really have too many she's a pretty like content child, so far we haven't had to have any major challenges with her actually physical or mental health or emotional health. And, I think that's somewhat of a credit to us, but also just who she is.
Yeah. I'm excited to see her.
Me too. Someday. I hope how would you feel about, I want to share with the world that video of her singing the Hello song from Dan's music classes where she says hello to penis. Maybe we can,
yeah, that's fine. It's funny. So that's actually an interesting thing about like parenting and caregiving. It's like, so we have a nanny. She's in a nanny share, and you also find out like where your boundaries and hard lines and what's important to you and your values and things like that. And like I have some friends where it's like there's any hint of like, fat shaming or fat phobia, right? Or like discipline, like that nanny would like, not be okay. And like, obviously I don't support those things too, but my line might be a little bit different. And so I was talking to our nanny about something involved, and we use the term vulva with Kira. It's actually really cute when she says it too.
Love that. Mm-hmm.
But I had said something to the nanny about like her vulva, and she was like, "What's that?" And I was like, "Oh, like her vagina area, like the whole thing."
Yeah.
But it's not like. And we have this book about. There's this great series on like consent and race and gender. I think the one I'm forgetting the one on gender, what it's called, but the one on race is called Our Skin. And the one on gender, like I just heard the nanny like read, and she's like, in her 50s. She's not from this country, but just like her notions and thoughts. And she's, pretty liberal for her identity, especially compared to like her family and things like that. But just to hear her talking about like non-binary kids and trans kids, she's kind of like, oh, what? She's like, I don't understand this.
Oh, it could be a good book for her then.
Mm-hmm.
Not to infantilize, but yeah, I'm just like, cool.
Learning for everyone.
Yeah. Were there any, like you said, the process of becoming a parent really requires you to clarify your values? Was there a value or certain values that really like crystallized for you in that process?
That's a good question. I think like working on an interesting thing that I feel like I'm learning about, and then like teaching Dan to also incorporate is, stuff with hunger signals, and like showing Kira that we trust her to trust her body, right? Like if she says she's still hungry, like, and she just already ate a full bowl of something, then she's still hungry, right? And if she's like, she says she's not hungry, then she's not hungry, right? And so trying to really instill that, like, kind of the basics of intuitive eating, I guess. Yes. And just thinking about like how we all have had that, but we've turned it off as we've gotten older, right? And like, those of us that were raised in the 90s and like, subjected to 90s diet culture, it's totally like harmed us, right? And so I think we're doing a lot of learning and relearning as parents, as we're like also learning alongside her.
Love. Honestly, speaking to my soul. And I think the value, so would the value of that in there be body trust or something like that?
Yeah. Like the values of, like anti-diet culture and that sort of thing. And knowing your own body.
That it's an internal thing. I think that's the big thing that fucked us all up, is like that our bodies are like these mysteries that like there's all these external factors we have to like keep in mind in our heads when making these decisions, and it becomes totally not intuitive.
Totally.
And like all this calculus.
And like as people in female bodies or like with female hormones, I feel like the role of hormones is so much stronger than we ever think and thought and were taught. And you know what I mean? Like different, even like if different parts of your cycle, your like body is going to feel different and hunger is going to feel different. Like you're not going to be the same amount of hungry today as you were yesterday.
I think hormones are like the most powerful force in nature. Totally. I keep saying that. You and Dan should check out. Have you guys heard of that book, Reclaiming Body Trust? It's fabulous. No. It's by Dana Sturdivant and Hillary Canavy. Don't know if I'm saying that right, but it is fabulous. Highly recommend it. Maya, thanks so
Maya.
much.
You're the best.
Yeah.
so fun. And dang, I really wish we lived closer to each other.
I know. It's so nice to see your faces.
And that's our show. Thanks for joining us. Our music is by Nightlight. We self-produce this podcast, so please subscribe, rate, and review. It really helps.